Put that glass down. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. My voice came out barely louder than a whisper, but somehow it cut through the entire room. Adrian Cole stopped with the crystal wine glass just inches from his lips. Every conversation around us died at once. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the clink of silverware somewhere behind me, and my own heartbeat pounding so hard it seemed impossible that no one else could hear it. I was standing beside the table where the most feared man in the city had been enjoying a private dinner, and I had just told him what to do. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 29 years old, worked 12-hour shifts whenever the restaurant needed me, and had spent most of my life learning how to become invisible in rooms like this. Being plus-size meant people often decided who I was before I ever opened my mouth. Some looked past me. Some looked at me with that quick, uncomfortable glance people think you don't notice. I noticed everything, especially tonight. The restaurant was one of those places where a single dinner cost more than my weekly paycheck. Dark wood, white tablecloths, soft golden lights reflected in polished glass. The kind of room where people spoke quietly because they assumed money made them important. Adrian Cole sat at the center of the private table, surrounded by 3 men in expensive suits. I had heard his name before. Everyone had. He was the kind of man people described in lowered voices. Powerful, untouchable, dangerous. But there was something about him that night that didn't fit the stories. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. He barely moved. Yet everyone around him seemed to wait for his permission before breathing. When I brought his wine, I noticed nothing unusual at first. The bottle was already open. The glass had been poured by someone else. I set the plate down and turned away. Then I saw it. A tiny shimmer beneath the restaurant's warm lights. Something at the bottom of the glass. I stopped. My father's voice came back to me from years ago. Never trust a drink you didn't pour yourself. I looked again. There was a faint residue clinging to the crystal. My stomach tightened. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know who had poured it. But I knew Adrian was about to drink it. So I moved. My hand struck the glass. Crystal hit the table. Red wine spread across the white cloth like spilled paint. Silence swallowed the room. Adrian slowly lowered his hand and looked at me. Not angry. Not yet. Just completely still. His eyes met mine, and suddenly every story I had ever heard about him felt very real. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he asked quietly. I swallowed. Yes. My fingers were trembling, but I kept my eyes on his. "I stopped you from drinking that." One of the men at the table stood immediately. Adrian raised a single hand, and the man stopped. Then Adrian looked down at the broken glass. His expression changed. Just slightly. "Why?" he asked. I stared at the wine pooled across the tablecloth. Because something was wrong with it. He studied me for several seconds. Then his voice became even quieter. "How did you know?" I opened my mouth. And for the first time that night, I realized the truth I had been trying to forget for 15 years might have just walked back into my life. For 15 years, I had tried not to remember that sentence. Never trust a drink you did not pour yourself. My father had said it so often that, as a child, I thought it was just another strange rule adults made up. But standing beside Adrian Cole's table, watching the wine spread across the white tablecloth, I suddenly remembered exactly where I had heard it. My father's old bar. The brass shelves. The smell of coffee and citrus. His hands polishing a glass while he watched me from across the room. He had always noticed things other people missed. And apparently, so had I. Adrian remained completely still. He looked at the broken crystal, then at me. The 3 men around him exchanged uneasy glances. One reached for his phone. Adrian stopped him with a quiet gesture. "Nobody calls anyone yet." His voice was calm, almost unnervingly calm. Then he looked at me again. "What did you see?" I pointed toward the bottom of the glass. There was something there. A residue. I saw it when the light caught the crystal. He leaned closer, studying the glass without touching it. "You recognized it?" "No." I shook my head. I recognized that something was wrong. One of the men gave a doubtful laugh. "She is a waitress. Maybe she simply dropped the glass." My face warmed. I had heard that tone before. The tone people used when they had already decided what I was capable of. Adrian did not look at him. "Did she?" he asked. The man fell silent. Adrian turned back to me. "Your name?" "Claire Bennett." "How long have you worked here, Claire?" 8 months. "And how many times have you interrupted a customer's dinner?" I almost smiled despite myself. This is the first. Something changed in his expression. Not a smile. Something closer to interest. He picked up a clean glass from the table and held it beneath the light. Bring me another bottle. One of the servers hurried away. I stood there, unsure whether I was supposed to leave. You can go, Adrian said. I nodded and turned. Claire. I stopped. Stay. I looked back at him. His eyes had returned to the damaged glass. I want you here when they test it. My heart skipped. Why? He finally looked at me. Because if you are right, you may have just saved my life. The words settled over me with a weight I could not explain. I wanted to tell him that I did not feel brave. I felt terrified. I wanted to walk away, clock out, drive home, lock my apartment door, and forget this entire night. But something inside me kept pulling me toward the glass, toward the strange residue, toward the memory of my father. A server returned with a sealed bottle. Adrian did not open it. Instead, he asked for the restaurant manager. Within minutes, the private dining room had become unnaturally quiet. No music, no casual conversation, just the soft movement of people waiting for answers. The manager approached nervously. Adrian asked who had handled his original bottle. The manager named 2 people, then 3. Then he stopped. Adrian's eyes narrowed. There should be 4. The manager looked confused. There were only 3 staff members assigned to this table. Adrian glanced at me. Who poured the wine? I answered before the manager could. I did not. The room went silent again. Then Adrian looked toward the untouched bottle and asked the question that made my stomach turn cold. Then who did? The question hung in the room. Then the manager swallowed hard. I do not know. Adrian's gaze did not move. That is not an answer. The manager hurried to explain that the wine had been delivered earlier that afternoon, checked by the kitchen staff, and stored in the private cellar until dinner service. Everything had been logged. Everything except the person who had carried the bottle upstairs. I listened without saying a word, but something about the explanation bothered me. I looked at the bottle sitting untouched on the table. That is not the same bottle, I said. Everyone turned toward me. Adrian's eyes sharpened. What? I pointed to the label. The bottle I brought earlier had a small tear near the bottom of the label. That one does not. The manager stared at it. Are you certain? Yes. I had spent enough evenings handling wine bottles to notice small details. The manager reached for the restaurant inventory sheet. His hands moved faster now. There should only be 1 bottle of that vintage in the private cellar. Adrian leaned back slightly. Then find out where the second bottle came from. The manager hurried away. I remained beside the table, suddenly aware that every person in the room was watching me. I folded my hands together to stop them from trembling. Adrian noticed. You can sit. I am working. You are not working anymore. His voice was firm, but there was no anger in it. I pulled out a chair several feet away and sat. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Adrian asked, Your father was a bartender? My breath caught. How do you know that? You mentioned him earlier. I realized I had said too much. He taught me to pay attention. Adrian studied my face. What was his name? Thomas Bennett. The name seemed to change something in him. It was subtle. A pause. A slight shift in his expression. Thomas Bennett, he repeated. Yes. Where did he work? Mostly private events. Hotels. Clubs. Restaurants. He served people who wanted discretion. Adrian looked down at the table. Did he ever work for me? I do not know. That was the truth. My father had died when I was 14. After that, I stopped asking questions because every answer seemed to make my mother sad. There were things he had kept from us. Names. Addresses. Old photographs. Conversations that stopped whenever I entered the room. Adrian looked at me again. How did he die? I felt my throat tighten. A car accident. He said nothing. Neither did I. The manager returned with a folder. Mr. Cole, there is a problem. Adrian took the folder. He scanned the first page, then the second. His expression became unreadable. This bottle was not logged into inventory. I leaned forward. Then where did it come from? The manager shook his head. I do not know. Adrian closed the folder. Who had access to the private cellar tonight? The manager listed several employees. Then he hesitated. And 1 outside contractor. Adrian looked up. Name. The manager checked the page. Daniel Mercer. The name meant nothing to me. But Adrian reacted immediately. His eyes shifted toward me. Do you recognize that name? I shook my head. No. Adrian was silent for several seconds. Then he asked, Claire, did your father ever mention a man named Daniel Mercer? My mind went completely still. I could see my father's old kitchen, his tired face, The way he had once hidden a photograph inside a drawer when he thought I was not looking. I had never known the man's name, but I remembered one detail. A silver ring with a small black symbol. I looked at Adrian. I do not remember the name. I paused, but I remember the ring. The moment I said the word ring, Adrian stopped breathing for a second. I noticed because I had been watching him carefully. The man who seemed impossible to surprise suddenly looked like someone had opened a door to a room he had kept locked for years. What kind of ring? He asked. I searched my memory. Silver. Not shiny. More like brushed metal. There was a small black symbol on it. Adrian stood slowly. What symbol? I do not know how to describe it. I lifted my hand and traced the shape in the air. It looked like two narrow lines crossing inside a circle. The color drained from the manager's face. Adrian noticed. So did I. You recognize it, I said. The manager looked down. Adrian's voice became quiet. Everyone leaves the room. The employees exchanged nervous looks. Now, chairs moved. Shoes crossed the polished floor. Within seconds, the private dining room was almost empty. Only Adrian, me, the manager, and two members of his security team remained. Adrian turned toward the manager. Tell me where Daniel Mercer is. The manager swallowed. I do not know. Then call him. The manager reached for his phone. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. Adrian looked at me. Claire, what exactly did your father say about that ring? I closed my eyes for a moment. I could almost hear his voice. He told me never to ask about it. I opened my eyes. But once, when I was 14, I saw him holding an old photograph. There were 3 men standing together. My father was one of them. Adrian's expression tightened. Who were the other 2? I never saw their faces clearly. I paused. But one of them wore that ring. Adrian looked toward the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the glass. Your father did not die because of an accident, he said. My stomach dropped. What did you say? He turned back to me. I said I do not believe the story you were given. I stood so quickly that the chair moved behind me. You knew my father? Adrian did not answer immediately. That silence told me enough. How? I asked. Years ago, Thomas Bennett worked an event for my family. My heart began pounding. What kind of event? A private meeting. He paused. Your father noticed something that was not supposed to be noticed. I stared at him. What? Adrian's eyes held mine. Someone was planning to betray me. The room seemed to shrink around us. 15 years of unanswered questions suddenly felt like they were standing right in front of me. Did my father tell you? I whispered. He tried. Adrian looked down at the untouched wine. But before we could speak again, he disappeared from my world. You thought he was dead. I was told he was. I felt cold despite the warm room. And you never investigated? His expression changed. I did. Those 2 words carried more weight than anything else he had said. For years. He reached into his jacket and removed his phone. He opened an old photograph and turned the screen toward me. I leaned closer. The image was faded, but I recognized my father immediately. He looked younger than I remembered, standing behind a bar with one hand resting on the counter. Beside him stood a man whose face I did not know. But I knew the ring. Silver. Black symbol. My breath caught. Adrian watched my reaction. Claire, he said quietly. That man is Daniel Mercer. Daniel Mercer. The name stayed in my mind as I stared at the photograph. I looked at the man beside my father, then at Adrian. Where is he now? Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he took the phone back and locked the screen. We do not know. My stomach tightened. You just said he was here tonight. I said his name was connected to the bottle. He paused. That does not mean he is still in the building. I looked toward the closed doors. The restaurant suddenly felt different. A few minutes earlier, it had been a place where I worked for tips and counted the hours until my shift ended. Now, every quiet hallway seemed to contain another unanswered question. Why would someone use a bottle connected to him? I asked. Adrian walked toward the window. Because whoever arranged this wanted me to notice the wrong person. I frowned. Then why leave the symbol? That is what I want to know. He turned toward me. And that is why you cannot leave alone tonight. I crossed my arms. I can take care of myself. I believe you. His answer came without hesitation. That surprised me. Most men in his position would have treated my objection like a problem to solve. Adrian simply looked at me as if he understood the difference between protection and control. But someone knows you recognize the glass, he continued. And someone may know about your father. My confidence slipped. How would they know about me? Because you stopped me. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had worked countless dinner shifts. The same hands that had just changed everything. What happens now? I asked. Adrian glanced at the security team. We check every record from tonight. We find out who brought the second bottle into this restaurant. Then we find out why your father's name is connected to it. The manager stepped forward carefully. Mr. Cole, there is something else. Adrian turned. What? The manager held out a small envelope. This was found in the private dining room after the staff cleared the service station. Adrian took it. He opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His eyes moved across the page. Then he handed it to me. I unfolded it. There were only 6 words written in black ink. Ask Claire about the old photograph. My breath stopped. I looked at Adrian. Someone knows my name. He nodded. That is what concerns me. I read the sentence again. The handwriting looked unfamiliar, but the message felt personal. Whoever had written it knew about the photograph before Adrian showed it to me. That meant the connection between my father and Daniel Mercer was not an old secret anymore. Someone had been waiting for me to remember it. Adrian, I whispered, what was in that photograph? He hesitated. Then he said, there was something behind your father. I looked at him. What? A mirror. I waited. And reflected in that mirror was another person. My pulse quickened. Who? Adrian's expression became serious. We never identified him. I looked again at the photograph on his phone. My father stood behind the bar. Daniel Mercer stood beside him. And in the dark reflection behind them, barely visible beneath the warm lights, there was a third figure. I leaned closer. My eyes adjusted to the faded image. Then I recognized something I had seen only once before. A small black symbol on a silver ring. The same symbol from the wine glass. The symbol on the ring was not just a detail anymore. It was the thread connecting my father, Daniel Mercer, Adrian Cole, and the strange bottle that had nearly changed everything. I stared at the photograph until my eyes began to ache. I have seen that symbol before, I said. Adrian's expression changed. Where? In my father's things. My voice sounded distant, even to me. There was a small wooden box he kept locked. After he died, my mother gave it to me. Adrian stepped closer, but stopped several feet away. Do you still have it? I nodded slowly. It is in my apartment. He looked toward the security team. Then we need to see it. I hesitated. Going home with Adrian Cole was not exactly what I had imagined when I started my shift that evening. But the questions surrounding my father were no longer memories I could ignore. They had followed me into the present. Fine, I said. But I am coming with you. Adrian nodded. Of course. We left the private dining room through a quiet hallway. The restaurant was still open, but the usual warmth had disappeared. Staff members glanced at us as we passed. Some looked curious. Others looked away quickly. Outside, the night air was cool, and the city was alive with headlights, traffic, and distant voices. Adrian's car waited at the curb. I stopped before getting inside. I can drive myself. I know. He opened the passenger door. But tonight, I would rather know where you are. I studied him. There was no command in his voice. Just concern. That made it harder to argue. I got in. During the drive, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Streetlights passed across the windows in steady intervals. Finally, I asked, why did you keep looking for my father? Adrian kept his eyes on the road. Because he was the last person who warned me that someone close to me could not be trusted. Did you believe him? Not soon enough. The answer was quiet. I looked out the window. You blame yourself. I should have listened. There was something human in the way he said it. Not the untouchable man everyone described. Just a person carrying an old regret. When we reached my apartment building, Adrian waited outside while I went upstairs. I unlocked the door and walked straight to the closet where I kept the box. My hands shook as I pulled it from the back shelf. It was small, dark wood, with a brass latch. I had not opened it in years. Adrian stood near the doorway. You do not have to do this tonight. I looked at him. I think I do. I opened the latch. Inside were old photographs, a folded letter, my father's watch, and a silver key. At the bottom was a small card. I picked it up. On the front was the same black symbol. On the back were 3 words in my father's handwriting. Trust no one. I turned toward Adrian. He stared at the card. Then his phone rang. He answered. His expression changed almost immediately. What happened? He listened in silence. Then he looked at me. Claire, someone just accessed the restaurant's security system. My stomach tightened. Who? Adrian lowered the phone. We do not know yet. I looked down at the wooden box. Beneath the card was something I had never seen before. A second photograph. I picked it up. It showed my father standing beside Adrian, both of them much younger. And behind them, reflected in a window, stood a third man wearing the silver ring. I turned the photograph over. There was a date written on the back. It was the same date my father had supposedly died. The date on the back of the photograph was impossible to ignore. It was the exact date my father had supposedly died. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. That cannot be right, I whispered. Adrian stood beside me, silent. I turned the photograph toward him. You said my father disappeared after warning you. He nodded. Yes. Then why was he photographed with you on the day he supposedly died? Adrian studied the image. I do not know. For the first time since I had met him, he looked genuinely unsettled. My phone began ringing. I looked at the screen. It was my mother. I answered immediately. Mom. There was silence on the other end. Then her voice came softly. Claire, where are you? At home. What? Another pause. Did you find the box? My heart stopped. I looked at Adrian. How did you know about the box? My mother sighed. Because your father told me to hide it. I sat down. You knew? I knew there were things he never told you. I thought keeping them from you would keep you safe. My hands tightened around the photograph. Mom, who was the man with him? She did not answer. Mom. Finally, she said. His name was Daniel Mercer. Adrian's eyes met mine. You knew him? I asked. Your father trusted him once. Her voice trembled. Then everything changed. What changed? Your father discovered that Daniel was working with someone inside Adrian's organization. I looked at Adrian. He remained still, listening. Who? I asked. My mother hesitated. I never knew his name. Your father only called him the man with the silver ring. The room seemed to grow colder. I looked at the photograph again. Mom, why did you tell me he died? Her voice broke. Because I believed it was the only way to keep you alive. I closed my eyes. The words sounded strange now. Alive. Not safe. Not protected. Alive. What really happened that night? I asked. My mother took a long breath. Your father called me from a pay phone. He told me to take you and leave town. He said someone had discovered that he had copied a set of records. What records? Financial records. Names. Payments. Meetings. Everything connected to the people who were trying to take control of Adrian's organization. Adrian looked at the photograph again. Did my father know? I asked. My mother went quiet. I do not know. Then the call ended. I stared at my phone. She hung up. Adrian nodded. She is frightened. I looked at him. Are you? He considered the question. Yes. That answer surprised me more than anything else. You are admitting that. I would rather admit fear than underestimate what we are facing. He picked up the photograph carefully. Claire, there is something you need to understand. If your father kept records, someone may still be looking for them. I looked down at the wooden box. Maybe that is why someone knew about the photograph. Adrian's phone rang again. He answered. This time, he listened for only a few seconds. His expression became serious. They found the person who accessed the security system. I stood. Who was it? Adrian looked directly at me. A former employee. I waited. His name is Daniel Mercer. My heart dropped. But you said he disappeared 15 years ago. Adrian's voice was quiet. That is what we believe. I looked at the photograph in my hand. The man beside my father had not disappeared from the story. He had simply been waiting outside it. And now, somehow he was back. Daniel Mercer was alive. I could barely process the sentence. For 15 years, I had believed my father died on a quiet road, leaving behind a photograph, a locked box, and questions no one wanted to answer. Now the man standing beside him in that photograph was apparently alive and had somehow accessed the restaurant security system that same night. Adrian looked at me carefully. Claire, I need you to stay here. I shook my head. No, I want answers. You may not like them. I have spent 15 years living with questions. I think I can handle answers. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Adrian nodded. Fair enough. He placed the photograph back inside the wooden box. But we do this carefully. I looked at him. You said Daniel was a former employee. What does that mean? He worked close to me. He knew how my organization operated. He knew who I trusted. And my father? Your father was outside that world. That was what made him valuable. I frowned. Valuable. He saw things without being part of them. People talked around him because they assumed he was invisible. I almost laughed. I know something about that. Adrian's expression softened for a moment. Yes, I noticed. Before I could answer, his phone rang again. He listened, then said, "Keep him there. I am on my way." He ended the call. "Daniel has been located." My heart raced. "Where?" "At a small hotel about 3 miles from here." I stood. "Then let us go." Adrian shook his head. "You stay here." "No. Claire." His voice was firm now. "You are the reason this investigation exists. That does not mean you have to put yourself in the middle of every step." I looked at him. "And you are the reason I am involved at all. If I had not stopped that glass, you might never have discovered any of this." His eyes held mine. "That is exactly why I do not want you taking unnecessary risks." The words were simple, but they carried something I had not expected. Concern. Not possession. Not control. Concern. I picked up the wooden box. "Then take me somewhere safe while you find him." Adrian nodded. "Agreed." We moved downstairs to a private office inside the building. Adrian's security team secured the area while I sat at a small desk with the box in front of me. I opened it again. This time, I noticed the silver key. I had always assumed it belonged to my father's old apartment, but there was no apartment anymore. I turned it over in my fingers. A tiny number was engraved on the side. 17. Adrian. He came over. "What is it?" I showed him the key. His eyes narrowed. "That is not an apartment key." "Then what is it?" He studied the number. "Storage unit." My pulse quickened. My father had a storage unit? Apparently. He looked at the photograph again. Then his phone rang. He answered. His expression changed. "Daniel Mercer is not at the hotel." I stood. "Then where is he?" Adrian listened for a moment. "He left a message." He ended the call and looked directly at me. "He asked for you by name." He asked for me by name. I could not move. For a few seconds, the office seemed completely silent, even though I could hear the faint hum of the building around us. Adrian watched me carefully. "What did he say?" I swallowed. "I do not know." "Then we find out." He placed his phone on the desk and played the message. A man's voice filled the room. Older than the voice I remembered from my childhood, but familiar enough to make my chest tighten. "Claire, if you are hearing this, then you found the box." I closed my eyes. It was him. My father. Or at least his voice. "I need you to listen carefully. The truth about that night is inside storage unit 17. I could not tell you the truth when you were young. I thought distance would keep you safe. I was wrong." The recording paused. Then his voice continued. "There is one person you can trust. His name is Adrian Cole." I opened my eyes. Adrian looked just as stunned as I felt. The recording continued. "If Adrian is with you, give him the key. He will know what to do." The message ended. I stared at Adrian. "My father trusted you." He looked down for a moment. I did not know he was alive. "Do you believe this message?" "Yes." His answer was immediate. "Then we go to storage unit 17. We left the office shortly afterward. The drive across the city felt different from the one earlier. That evening, I was no longer simply trying to understand what had happened to my father. I was finally moving toward an answer. The storage facility was quiet, with rows of metal doors beneath bright overhead lights. Adrian found Unit 17 near the back. I held the silver key in my hand. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded. I inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked. Inside was a small collection of boxes, old documents, photographs, and one wooden chair. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looked important at first glance. Then I saw a familiar leather notebook. My father's handwriting covered the first page. Dates. Names. Locations. Payments. I turned another page. Adrian leaned beside me, reading silently. Then I found a photograph. It showed my father standing with Adrian many years earlier. Daniel Mercer was there too. But this time, there was no mystery about the third man. The photograph had been taken from the opposite side of the room. His face was visible. I recognized him immediately. The restaurant manager. My hands went cold. He was there tonight. Adrian nodded slowly. And he knew exactly what was in that glass. I looked through the notebook again. One final page contained a sentence written in my father's hand. "The person closest to Adrian is the one who will try to finish what we stopped." I looked at Adrian. "Your manager." He was silent. Then he took a breath. He was never just my manager. The truth settled between us. My father had spent 15 years trying to protect a secret. Tonight, I had accidentally uncovered it by stopping one glass of wine. Adrian looked at me, and for the first time, the distance between his world and mine seemed smaller. "You saved me tonight," he said quietly. I shook my head. "My father did." Adrian looked at the photograph. Maybe he did. Then he looked back at me. But you were the one who saw the glass. I smiled faintly. Then I suppose we both know what happens next. Adrian nodded. We finish what your father started. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt like the story of my father's disappearance was no longer an ending. It was finally becoming an answer.